Hello guys and welcome to another video. I'm Adi from Pixel Profits and this is part 2 in a series of guides on how to use Audacity. In this part of the series I'm going to be looking at recording and all the basic tools and functions that you need to get started with Audacity. By the end of the series we're going to go all the way through to applying effects to our voice and making it sound good, so stick with me if that sounds like something you're interested in. Also, I'm going to put timestamps in the description below so you can skip back and forward between parts if you want in the future. And don't forget that if you like this video, leave me a like, a comment, subscribe and hit that notification bell to see when I release new content. Okay, so let's get started. So before you start recording, I recommend that you run through a little checklist. One of the first questions you want to ask yourself is, do you want to be recording in mono or stereo? What's the difference? Well, basically the only difference is that, let's say if you wanted to record vocals for music, you might want to record in stereo, as that gives you more options to mix the vocals into the rest of the composition with the music and instruments and stuff. But if you're just recording a simple voiceover, podcast, video like this one, then really all you need to record in is mono. So let's just take a quick look at that before we get started. So here you can see my microphone selected and I've got mono selected, and that will record one single track, one audio file here when we start recording. To change it to mono, you go to Edit, Preferences, and this will change the defaults actually. Edit Preferences and then Devices. And right here you can see my microphone and you can also see that I've got mono selected there. So that's how you'd make Audacity default to mono in the first place. But you can change it here every time if you wish. Okay, so now you've decided if you want stereo or mono, let's take a look at a little checklist that we should run through. And I did this before I started today, and when I did I realised that my office door was open and that creates a bit of extra echo which I don't like. So lucky I ran through the checklist, otherwise I'd record the video and then realise, okay, it doesn't sound so good. So it's really worth running through the checklist no matter how many times you do this, how many videos you record. And the checklist will look something like this. So we want to look at, do we know what we're going to say? Do we have a script to read or notes to follow? And do you have all the resources prepared that you need? Web pages, images, programs and all that sort of stuff. Also, is your microphone positioned properly? And I could do a separate video on this in the future, and if you guys are interested in that, let me know in the comments section below. And also check your levels are correct. We can click up here on the start monitoring and we can see that my levels are somewhere between -18 and -12. That's fine. A little higher can be fine also, a little lower even, but don't go above 0. That's the key. We also need to think about, is your phone turned off or on silent? Now this is a really annoying one if you don't do this, because you get messages, notifications and all sorts of stuff popping up while you're doing your video, and they'll be right in the middle of your recording and basically ruin it. So think about that. And then we want to do a test recording or a sample recording to make sure that everything sounds good. Why are we doing this? It will save us time, a lot of time sometimes. So do it every time you record something, I recommend. Okay, so when we record, we want to make sure that we record a small portion of silence at the beginning of each recording. And the reason for that is that we want to make sure we have something for the noise removal plugins or effects that we're going to use later to work with. They need a portion of silence, and it's not really going to be silence, it's going to actually pick up some ambient room noise from, let's say, your PC fans or your air conditioning. So we want that background noise at the start of the recording with nothing else over the top of it, so that we can give Audacity something to remove later. We'll get to that later in a separate video. But just for now, get used to recording about 8-10 seconds maybe of silence, just to make sure that you get a good sample of the room ambience. Alright, I'm going to do a little less for this video because I know my recording environment, but I'm going to go ahead now and record something. And to do that, you can either click the record button in the transport toolbar here, or you can press R on the keyboard. So let's go ahead and do that now. Hello guys and welcome to this Pixel Profits tutorial. Today we'll be looking at the basics of recording in Audacity and learning about some of the most important tools and features of the program. So I hit the space bar to stop, or you can click the button here in the transport toolbar. And now we can see we have an audio clip represented by a waveform, and you can see that right here. The taller parts are where it's louder, and the smaller parts are where it's quieter. So let's left click. When we get these two arrows pop up when we mouse over the bottom of the clip here, we can left click and hold and then drag down to make things a little bigger. Now we can see things a bit more clearly, and we can see my voice, and we can also see the odd pop or click here, which is why I tell you make sure you record a good amount so that you don't use this sort of thing for noise removal later, but we'll get to that. Okay, so playback then. This is a transport toolbar, we'll be using this a lot. Playing back the audio file, you can press here to play, or you can hit the spacebar. I always prefer to use keyboard shortcuts, so let's try and do that now. And it will play from wherever you've got this vertical line. So if you left click, you can change the position of the vertical line. And if you press the spacebar, it'll play from there. And you can press spacebar again to stop. So what's the difference between stop and pause? Well, when you stop, it will reset the position of this playhead here to the position of this vertical line, and it will just continuously play back from there. If you play and then you press P to pause, look what happens here. It stops. You unpause, it starts. You pause again, it stops. So it continues from actually where you left off. So that's the difference between stop and pause. Stop resets to the line. Pause will play back from the point where you stopped. So another useful function is if we click on the waveform and left click and drag a selection over the waveform like that, we can also play just that selection by hitting the space bar, and it will play just that part of the audio that we can see here, and then it will stop and revert back to the beginning. If we hit shift plus space bar, it will actually play in a continuously repeating loop. As you can see here, it's just going over and over the same part. So there's a couple of extra options, and you can do these by using the keyboard shortcuts, and you can see those here if you mouse over here. We also want to look at recording and how that works with different shortcuts. So if we press this button here or press R on the keyboard, what it's going to do is it's going to start recording at the end of the track again, which is perfect. This didn't used to be the default behavior of Audacity. Let's just take a look at it now. We're pressing R and we're creating a new audio clip, but on the same track. And that's good. We like that. It keeps things organized. But what we don't want to do usually is create a new track each time we start recording again. And that's what the default behavior of Audacity used to be. So if you find that's happening in your program, you might want to look at updating Audacity. But we can still recreate that if we wanted to create a new track and record on that by holding down Shift and then pressing R on the keyboard. And you can see now that it's recording into a separate track. So the function of recording onto the end of a track is usually known as append recording. So you're adding something to the end. So you do that by pressing R, and a new track can be created, recorded on by pressing Shift plus R. Now I have two more buttons up here. We've got skip to start and skip to end. You can also use the home and end keys on the keyboard to activate that. It just makes the vertical line go to the start or the end of the selection basically. Now the behavior of the start and the end button will vary depending on what you have selected and modifier keys that you press. So the main one though is just to skip to the start and the end. I don't use this very much, so I'm not going to go into all the different options there. You can look into those in the Audacity manual, which you can find online. Alright, zooming in and out. So we have a tool here called the zoom tool, and we can click that if you want. You can also use the keyboard shortcut, as you can see F4 there. And that gives us a magnifying glass tool, and then if we click somewhere on a waveform, it will zoom in to that point. This isn't a bad way to do it. You can also zoom back out using the right mouse button. That's an okay way to do things. There's three ways, and that's the first of three. I'm going to show you all three, and I'm going to show you which one's the best. So the first one is using the magnifying glass there. You can also hold down Control on the keyboard and then use your mouse scroll wheel to zoom in. But you see what happens now? As we zoom in more and more, or zoom back out, the actual vertical line is starting to move off the screen. So we're not actually looking at the point that we selected here. We're now looking at somewhere completely different. So you can sort of make it work by moving the cursor and keep moving it to focus on the middle line here. But the best way I find is to, let's see, we'll go back to the beginning, and then we'll click at a point that we want to zoom in on, and then we'll hold down Control, but this time we're going to press number 1 on the keyboard. Watch what happens. So it brings this selection part to the center. Even if my cursor's over the side there, look, it keeps the selection that you've made in the center of the screen, which is really handy. So this is in my opinion, the best way to zoom in. Now you're zooming in with number 1 and you zoom out with number 3, or Control and 3 I should say. So like so. But if you want to reset to the default view, you press Control and 2. And that brings you back to the default zoom level that you had before. Now I'm just going to double click on this second part of the clip that we recorded and press Delete to get rid of it. I'll also click the little X over here to delete that track. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this track. So to do that, I hold down Control and press D on the keyboard. And you can see now I've duplicated an exact copy of the audio clip into another track. Now you might be wondering, why would you want to duplicate the track? Well, you could apply effects to one of them here and then keep the other one as default so you could compare the two later and see how they sound. And that's what we're going to do. So we'll leave it here as a duplicated track. Now, when we're talking about duplicated tracks or using more than one track, it's important to think about the mute and solo buttons that you can find on each track. And what they do is basically if you press mute, it will mute this track and allow any other tracks to play. So when you're playing back, you won't hear this track. And you can press solo, and that will just play back the audio from this track and it will mute all the other tracks. You can see now our second track there is muted. So mute and solo are quite useful to know about. We also might want to look at importing an audio file. So we can go to File, Import Audio, or you can just drag in from another folder, drag in and drop a audio file. We also might want to think about saving. So you can do the usual File, Save Project and Save Project there, or you can just hit Control and S and that will bring up the Save menu and you can decide where you want to save stuff. So also, if we made a mistake, let's say we didn't want to duplicate this track here, we want to take that away, we can hit Control plus Z on the keyboard and that will remove the last change that we made. Hitting Control plus Y will redo the last change. So they're useful to know about. You can also use these buttons here in the toolbar to undo and redo. And another good way is to go to Edit, and then you can see undo and redo here, but you can actually see what you'll undo and redo. But there's an even better way. Let's look at that. It's under View, History. And here, if we drag this out a little to make it a little bigger, here we can see all the changes we've made throughout the whole project. So we created a new project and we recorded some audio and so on. This can get obviously very big, depending on the amount of changes we make. But what this allows you to do is, if we move it out of the way just so we can see, if we wanted to click back to a previous state of the project, let's say when we first started, we click here and it reverts to right near the start of the project where we had just recorded our first audio clip and done nothing else. You can also skip back to our current state. Now, important to think about, if you skip back to a previous state and then you make a new change, a new edit, so that new edit that you make will replace anything that's after it in the timeline here. So just think about that. If you skip back and you make a change, it's going to replace all these steps and they're going to be gone. So just be careful. This is a good way to skip back a number of steps quickly, or find a point that you were previously happy with and revert to that. Let's close that down. Okay, so pretty much that's really what we need to cover in this video, I would say. We can look at more editing in the second part of the video, but for now, let's leave it there. And if you found this video useful, don't forget to leave me a like and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. And as always, guys, I really appreciate your time. If you've got any questions or comments, leave them below and I'll answer all of them. And I really hope to see you in the next video. So take care and thanks for watching.